Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang, and today I want to show you something different. I want to show you some game that I played. I guess it was a tournament right before quarantine started, so it was around Christmas time of last year, 2019, that I felt like I really played one of my best games in a while. So I played this in a tournament in Las Vegas called the North American Open, and I was playing in the highest section, the open section. So I just want to show you in this last game how I felt and really my thoughts about how I played this game. So my first move was knight f3, and that's just developing the knight, controlling the center. Plays g6. And this is sort of like the modern, and I just bust out with h4. Here's the thing, is that I'm not controlling the center, and this is certainly a violation of our opening principles, but I want to attack where he's starting from. I want this bishop to feel uncomfortable getting developed here, right? Like, for example, the bishop here, h5. h5 could happen. Like, on the second move, I could already be pushing through, right? So I want to create pressure straight from the start. Knight f6 prevents it because h5, knight takes, g4, knight back, g5, knight back, right? So clearly the knight there does a great service. So I play d4. I want to get this guy out, the bishop out. I want to get the knight out, so I want to get all my pieces out. Bishop g7, I play c3. And the thing is, with this kind of structure, I set myself up toward the king side. I want to be able to tell my opponent, okay, I'm going to attack on this side. b6, developing the bishop, keeping an eye on this e4 square. Maybe one day coming in with d5, bishop g5, bishop b7, knight d2, d6. And now with d6, this is what we call a sort of a hedgehog, right? He wants to get this pawn up one step, get this pawn up one step, and, well, that's not the move. But let's say e3 happens, right? This pawn up, right? And then let's say something like this. Like, you see this sort of structure. It's sort of like a hedgehog. It's like, you have this sort of formation, and then it all comes in to be like really solid. Like, you cannot damage a porcupine. So that's the structure that black goes for. So in this position I took, and the reason I took was because this knight was so important for controlling this h5 push. So takes, and I pushed for it. Knight d7, and I played queen a4. The reason being is that I want to hold this knight accountable. I don't want him to move to any other square just yet. a6, threatening to push this pawn up. I play e4. I strike in the center. Plays b5, play queen b3. And now I was really surprised when my opponent went castles, because here I have two options. I can play a4, and after takes, queen takes bishop, or I was thinking maybe c6 would happen, and then I could play bishop d3, get the e5 push in, and then go for this pawn, because the queen is pinning this pawn to this king, right? There's a pin going on, so this pawn cannot move. So when this pawn cannot move, that means that this pawn cannot capture this pawn. And because this pawn cannot capture this pawn, that means that this pawn is the only defender. So that means if we have the bishop and this pawn on it, then we are going to win this pawn. So what happens is that queen b3 castles, I just take the pawn right away. I think, okay, I want to open up this file because I know he can't take here because the queen is pinning the king. Takes c4. So I rip this open, right? So just like my thought about a4, same thing here, c4. But I add a component into it. What I'm doing is I'm trying to shift this queen over here and shift him over here so he can get into the attack. So he plays king g7. I get queen over, and of course I could have also taken the pawn here, which is also a really good option I was considering. Takes, takes, and bishop takes to threaten bishop takes knight, and queen takes bishop. Also works. But I chose the interesting approach. I chose queen e3, rook h8, right? So I chose queen e3 to come here, first of all. Very important because that's where my attack starts going, starts really firing up. So rook h8 takes, and of course the best move here is taking with the queen, but that runs into pawn up. Takes, takes, right? And this bishop is trapped. Other than here, g3. And now we know the bishop is trapped. So my opponent, realizing that this bishop was going to be trapped, he went king takes. Still went e5. Bishop g7, because he didn't want to deal with this guy, right? He was already very strong. Didn't want to take, and then go back. He thought, okay, I'm solid here. Why not just go back first? And I start striking. Get the knight in. Threaten to take this pawn to fork these two pieces. And I want to get the queen to h3 to come down here as well. So he plays queen f8. And here I play another move. So clearly I was thinking about queen h3, possibly wanting to take this knight, but I thought about bishop h6, and then e6. e6 being after takes, knight takes. The queen wants to defend this, but if you go here, the knight can take it, right? But if you go here, the queen can take the bishop. So that was a good alternative as well, but I played it in a different order. e6, knight f6, queen h3, bishop h6. So here we got to like the same position, right? But instead, right, this is the same position. Knight takes f7. So just like in the game, we did it as well. King h7. I played g4, threatening to play g5. So b takes c4. I could play g5 easily, and I would be winning. But I chose to delay it for some reason. So I played bishop takes, c5. Chose to take my time because I realized that there's nothing really stopping this move. So I took my time. c4, bishop c2. I want to keep my bishop on this diagonal so that this pawn is pinned, right? This pawn is how I will be able to damage him. Knight d5, knight f3. So now I'm bringing in this guy, right? Because it's important to bring in all your forces for an attack. Knight f4, knight check, king g8. I finally win this, but I could have won it with check. King g7 and knight f5. Because after gf5, queen h7, king f6, queen takes, Bam. Queen h7, king f6, and knight f7. That is winning. But I didn't see that somehow. I didn't see all that. So I was like, you know what? Let's just get the piece. So we take it with the queen. We offer a trade to this person. And we know that if you move over, I checkmate you. So that's not happening. So black traded pieces. Takes, king g7, get the knight back there for dominance, right? The rook can't come here because the knight's guarding the square, and our knights look dominant. He plays bishop d5 to get the pawn that protects these knights. King d2, because I realize, okay, can't exactly protect this pawn, but I can play king d2, swing the rook over and look for it. Bishop takes, knight takes, knight takes. So obviously I'm thinking in my mind here, okay, this knight looks kind of trapped, and I'm really not sure how to proceed. But there are two ways of saving this knight. Rook e1, threatening the knight. King takes it, protects the knight. But I have bishop e4. And the reason behind it is after rook comes out, wants to come here, I get bishop d5 in. Threatens the knight, threatens the pawn. And the knight is what we want. So that's an interesting way to do it. Another way to do it is how I did it in the game. d5. Threaten the knight, so if king takes, d takes knight. So he wanted to keep material on the board because he's down material, and that's the right way to do it. Knight d4, knight g5. So now he's harassing my pawns, and I want to protect both of these pawns. So check, and he takes that pawn, right? I want to start checking him as well. So I want to get this pawn. So he's still harassing my pieces. A3, get the knight out. Knight c6, finally get to take this pawn. Knight d4, knight d2, rook c2. And this is an important moment, because here's the thing. If takes here, knight takes, then king a2, knight takes rook. And we're all equal material, and that's not good, because we're trying to win here. So, rook c2. The correct move here is rook d1. And the reason being that after rook takes, you might think rook takes, knight check, right? King up, knight takes, and it'll be equal material again. But here's the thing. I have this in-between move, check. King f6, rook takes. And this check no longer works because bishop takes knight. So, by playing rook d1, as I've explained before, I basically prevent all that. So he goes back, bishop a2, knight check, knight g3. So I prepare to get this rook out here. So he plays knight f3 to prevent it, bishop d1 to attack the pawn, g5, rook d3 to threaten the knight. I play check, check, take the pawn, and check again. This time the knight has to trade, the rook takes. There's 3 pawns, I have 4 pawns, I have an extra bishop, my opponent resigned. So, I would say the lessons learned from this game is that, I was able to attack on this side. I was able to maintain the center, and especially because I was able to apply pressure like this with g4 and g5, and then eventually I broke through on this side. So mainly it was my offensive on this side, the king side, that led me to victory. So thank you.